Sawubona, and you would also say Sawubona.
Sawubona.
And this is important. There's a proverb that says, an African proverb that says, it is important to start correctly. And so that's one of the things we want to do is we're talking about being African-centered and coping, and beyond coping, just really living and living the best we can. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And so in order to start correctly, I will go back to Sankofa, some of our ancient tradition, and ask my elder, whoever's the elder in the room, if I have permission to continue and proceed. So I don't want to point anybody out. Some of us know that we are usually the elders. Thank you. Do I have permission?
You have permission.
That's it. Thank you so much. And so we're going to start as a way to continue correctly with libations. And many of you are familiar with libations, but in case you're not, I will, I'll describe it and remind us of what it is. Within African culture, traditional and also contemporary African culture, ritual is very, very important. And one of our major rituals is that of libations. Many of us are familiar with libations, although we may not know that's the name. I think about when I heard the term libations, realizing that we have been doing that in my family long before we even use this notion of African-centered. So libations is a prayer, if you will. That's the way I think about it. It is thanksgiving. It is a way to give thanks, to acknowledge and recognize that which is, some of us would say greater than us, and that is known by many names, throughout our cultural and spiritual traditions. Also acknowledging those who have come before us, and those who will come after us. It's important to ground ourselves in that connection of past, present, and future in terms of who we are, where we come from, who we are in this community, and in the community that goes beyond us. So as we learn about the African-centered perspective, we know that past, present, and future all exist at the same time. We're here because of our parents who may no longer be present with us, but they're here with us. That's past, we're present. And those that come, after us, our children, whether we birth them or not, are also here because we're knowing them, we're saying their names, we're thinking about them. So past, present, and future. So we pour liquid with libations. If we were on the continent, if we were Ghana, because that's where I've done most of my work internationally, I say that if we were in Ghana, we would use schnapps. I like to say that spirit likes spirit. So I'm using water, but you can imagine that it's schnapps or some other kind of liquor. So with this water filtered of impurities, we pour libations, acknowledging, recognizing the Creator, who's known by many names throughout our families, throughout our communities, within our spiritual and cultural traditions. The Creator who woke us up this morning, allowing us to be alive, to be here together, to do the work and the play that we're here to do, to learn about living fully, about coping, about not only dealing with grief and loss and other things, but honoring our ancestors and learning how to, in the midst of all of that, live in joy and happiness and peace because it is all interconnected. That is another precept of the African-centered perspective. And so as I pour the water, and I'll pour it on this plant, which I realize today has babies in it. I'm so excited about that. I think it really is appropriate for our gathering today, that this beautiful plant now has babies that are growing in it. Didn't even know that. And so I pour libations, I pour the water. And when I pour the water, I invite you to say aloud or silently a word of power or strength from your cultural or spiritual tradition. We pour and say libations. Acknowledging our ancestors, those who are known by us all, generally known by us. They have worked hard. They have been the freedom fighters. They have been the family and community builders. They are those who are known historically. We might learn about them sometimes in school, but oftentimes we have to learn about them outside of school because, you know why, because. So as I pour libations now, I encourage you to say aloud those names of our freedom seekers and our freedom fighters and our family and community developers and builders. People such as Martin Luther King Jr. Say their names out loud so they can hear us.
Asa Hilliard.
Ashe. 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 Queen Kandasi. Ashe. Aaron. Ashe. Ashe. Ashe, for those named and unnamed. And some of those people, we actually have some of their homegoing programs, so you may want to look at those later on today. Some of them from our African-centered ABSI community and others outside of that community. But they're all a community, right? We're all the same community. And so now those ancestors, maybe a little closer to home, those whose blood flowed through our veins, those who we may know by many names. They might be mother, father, more like, intimately, mama, my dear, granny, grandpa, baba, some other names. You got, colorful names, Big Red, Lonnie, whatever they are. You know their names. We're going to, as I pour libations now, we're going to say their names out loud so they hear us too. They're in this space. We're not inviting them in this space. They're in this space. And so we're acknowledging it and saying to them in our own way, Sawubona, see you. Say their name. Ashe. Say it loud. I know some of them kind of hard to hear because they're so old. So you gotta say it because there's a lot of them up in here. Let's hear. Say their names loud. That's it. Ashe. Say those names like you know them and you knew them and you love them. Ashe for those names and unnamed. Because some of those we don't know by name, but we know them in spirit. And finally, we pour libations for the unborn children. So important. We have borrowed their world, and we commit to, we not only plan to, but commit to leaving the world better than we found it for them. And that's going to take a lot of work now, but we got to do it. That's why we're here. We pour and we say libation. Asheo. Midasi.
Good afternoon, everybody. I let the church folk in the back wait to the prayer ended. May I ask for the permission of my elders to speak? Thanks. I don't take that part of the ritual lightly. There was a moment that I was asked not to speak, and so I appreciate the permission and the opportunity. And for the gathering, we back here at the Carruthers Center. It's been 2 years since we've been in this space. It's been renovated, and the projector still works, the mic still works. We just getting back to business. Thank you, Mama Afua, for that, starting us right. If you're here for the first time at an ABSI event, Mama Afua is also known as Dr. Doris Tolliver. And the thing I love about this organization is that the Mama is a higher title than the doctor for me. It's a family atmosphere. We're trying to figure this thing out. We got degrees, we got expertises, we got licenses, but we all African people just trying to do our best to elevate to our highest destiny. So whatever your profession is, we all belong here. So if you believe in the healing and the restoration of Black people, you're in the right place. We are going to talk today about a somber topic, I know it's been a tough year for a lot of folk. I realized as I was planning this event, we're putting some slides together, that I needed this personally because I lost my sister this year and I forgot about it. Right? It has not occurred to me. I can say it out loud, but it has not registered to my body yet that my sister's gone. Because we didn't, it happened so quickly. It was such a disruption, we couldn't get it together to plan a funeral. Right? We just couldn't even do it. There's no obituary for my sister because we could not formally send her away because of COVID, because of the frenzy of it. So I needed a moment to remember what we lost in our family and talk amongst our family about how to celebrate her, how to honor her, how to move forward, how to heal, how to grieve, all these things are things that I personally need. So this is a very personal topic that we're going to talk about today. My task to begin us is to share some ideas about altars. I don't know if everybody noticed, before you walked into this space, you walked past an altar upstairs. This is the first time I've seen such a formation in this building, and I've been looking for them. Like when I see altars in space, I look for them, and I pause, and I stop, and I'll give reference to it. I might kneel to my knee, but I'll honor what it means to represent our ancestors, the connection, the cycle of life, and altars are that. So we're just going to talk openly about some configurations of altars, how they try to make it a spiritual, a ritual, a sacred space. We want to make it not a spooky thing, right? We understand that one of the reasons we gather like this and talk openly about our traditions is because we all grew up in this place, most of us probably did, and being an American, being a black American, being any kind of American means having to deal with some level of brainwashing about African things. Like I grew up playing drums because my dad took me to drums, and I went to school, and I still vividly remember being called African booty scratchers. I still vividly remember those images of watching Tom and Jerry and seeing them in the jungle with the cannibals and the bones in their nose. And there's a demonization just in the day-to-day of being an American that has to do with distancing ourselves from African traditions and not even like separating them, but like the negative connotation of them. So we're trying to recover that. We're trying to restore those things. We're trying to remember them and put them back into their proper place in our family traditions. And we have to do it we're doing it upstream, like we're doing it against opposition. There's still no public places where we can see our traditions being celebrated widely. There's no TV shows for us. There's no movies where we see us. And that's different for other cultures. So we're going to talk about that. I want to talk about what it looks like for other cultures to publicly celebrate their ancestry in ways that we need to catch up to. So I just want to look at that a little bit. And again, this is the altar. I came in last night to make sure the projector worked, and I saw the altar. It was the first time I seen it. And I had to stop for a moment because I saw my father on there, right? This is my father. He passed about 16 years ago now. And he's the one that used to bring me to the center for programs, right? So I'm here now as the chair of the organization that uses the space, and I taught here because of Barbara Conrad Worrell, who's also an ancestor. And again, it's hard to, it's because COVID makes it so weird that I still expect to see Barbara Conrad show me stuff, right? It's like, I feel like I ain't seen them because we ain't been gathering. I feel like I haven't seen my sister because we haven't had the family stuff yet. It's going to be a season of a lot of people remembering what we lost during the holidays, which is why we wanted to do it around this time. There's going to be a lot of Thanksgiving tables where people are like, oh, wait, she really not coming back. So we wanted to prepare for that. We wanted to help have conversations about that so that we can, really properly grieve and elevate them and thank them. When I think about the African perspective, I just recently got my DNA done for the first time. Right? I know I'm African through and through. I ain't need no data for that. But looking at this really helps me understand what we've always meant when we say African-centered. That for me to reclaim my traditions isn't as simple as going back to the Igbo people or to the Zulu people or to the Ewe people. I got all of them mixed in my blood. It's the tragedy of the trauma that happened to us, but it's the brilliance of the superpowers that we have in our bodies that gives us birthright access to a bunch of different places in sub-Saharan Africa. And so when we talk about African Center, we're talking about collecting the best of the principles across the African continent throughout time. It's a big study. It's not a small task. So it requires a lot of people. There's a lot of books that have been written about it, but there's a lifetime of study to really do this work, to find out, not Nigeria, the country that was carved up by the Europeans, but like the Igbo and the Yoruba, what were the people that were doing, what were they doing to grieve back then? What were the disruptions and the processes of the wellness practices that we need to reclaim, that we didn't just forget, like it didn't just fall out of pocket like keys, we didn't just like, it was stomped out of our heads like trauma. We were vitally removed from the traditions that are in my bloodline, and so there's a healing process in gathering like this, doing libations, playing drums. So that's what the organization's all about. So again, very glad to see so many people come out, but that by itself is a part of the African-centered sort of healing paradigm that we got to gather. And it's, we're trying to do it as safe as we can, but community is a part of the healing. And the isolation that COVID has given us, and that it's about to get cold again, it's going to be even more difficult to gather. Like just coming in the room together is healing for African people, for everybody. But we say for African people because we understand we connect to the first people on the planet, and as teachers of the rest of the people on the planet, as parents of the people on the planet, there are things that we knew that we did that we have to get back to that gathering by itself represents. And so it also means that there's an eye we are attuned to when we study our stuff, where we get to see our things and our people without putting African on it.
Yeah.
Mama Fuller said we got African in our bones. Like it's just it. We do this stuff without calling it. We might demonize the thing in one sentence and then do that exact thing without awareness of it. And so we're trying to bridge those things. Remember, but also extract that which is already there. Like the European could not dehumanize us, despite all they did. Despite their attempts to take away our stuff, there's something like a salt in a stew that you can't take from a people, and you'll see them do it anyway. They'll build altars on the streets, and they put flowers on them just like we do. They pour water, they pour liquor, they got candles. Nobody taught them that. There was no workshop for that. They just did what they knew they had to do to honor what they lost, and there's a sacredness about that, even without calling it African. But there's also a power in calling it African to redeem, to restore in a very deliberate way. So all of that is happening at the same time in our grieving rituals. So we want to point to it. This is George Floyd altar. It spontaneously happened. The community said we had a huge loss. We want to memorialize that somehow, and it happened in the way that it has happened for indigenous people for centuries without no plan, no organizing, saying, okay, let's have a meeting, create an altar. It just happened spontaneously. And it's a beautiful thing to see. I've also been watching in Chicago, I'll be honest, I've been jealous as I've been watching the Latinx community celebrate their ancestors so openly and publicly. I saw like 20 of these. Dia de los Muertos, they were building community altars all over Pilsen, all over Little Village. There were beautiful celebrations of their ancestry in public, bold ways that I don't see African people doing. We don't do this in that way, and it's not a competition. It's really an understanding of how we can learn from other people's cultures and remember who we are by the inspiration that other people can provide us. So I was inspired by the Dia de los Muertos celebrations that I saw happening. This is one where they had one to honor those assassinated by the state. So a bunch of different configurations of public gatherings to honor ancestors that was happening in Chicago this year that I was, watching, studying, went to some of them, and inspired by it. They were building beautiful altars. This is what happened this year. Big, beautiful, brilliant honorings of their ancestors. And we as Black folk, you look at the numbers, we experienced more death than anybody else through COVID, through gun violence. We had death all around us. And our young people are just swimming in death with no conceptualization of how to make sense of it, no understanding of what to do with the loss. They just like, man, we're losing people. But we not gathering as a community to say, this is what that means. This is how you honor your little big bro, your little bros, your cousins, your homies. This is what you do. This is how you create sacred space to give reverence to them. This is how you make a testimony to the loss that they were. Like we gotta have these conversations because the young people are not going to church as much as they used to. Like I used to have church, I grew up in the church, and so I used to at least have my grandma was in a better place. I had images of heaven, and it was a comfortingness. It was comforting of like the sense that there was a continuity, that the death was not the end. And I think that we have traditions like this that that our young people are not connected to. And it is our responsibility to help, particularly now with COVID and gun violence and all that stuff. We gotta desperately give them something, because without that understanding, it just turns into anger, it turns into grief that's unprocessed, and turns it back to violence, right? So there's a healing in these rituals that can interrupt the violence that is not on the agenda of the mayor. When the city thinks about how to solve gun violence, they think more control, more guns, more police. We got a medicine in our traditions that the city needs, that our people need. And so part of this gathering is to think about how to administer that.
Can I just, really quick on that comment?
Yeah.
Also looking at the Day of the Dead, that is the African in being Latinx.
Yeah.
Because they are African people, they are indigenous people. So it's interesting, they still honor those indigenous African rituals that we may be disconnected from as we call ourselves African American.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to take my children to one. I had to be like, this is what they do in the public library in Pilsen. The thing that I do at home, the way I honor my ancestors when we do these private ceremonies, in these communities, they do it publicly in the library. We can go see it. Because part of the job of the parent is to teach the children the tradition, to have the continuity in my house of the things that my father taught me. But I had to go to another community to show them what an altar looked like. And as I'm watching these ceremonies, I'm having these questions like, as they're doing this, as they're exercising the African in them, what does that look like for us? And when I was watching this clip, I was thinking like, what if we did a Day of the Dead ceremony, what would the dance be in African American culture? If we got an ethnic group, we got an African American tribe, what does our music sound like? Is it jazz? Is it hip hop? Is it stepping? Like, we have our own traditions that we got to claim and connect to these expressions of culture, of grief, and do it in a way that, this is as beautiful and as impactful and dynamic as everybody else is doing it, because again, we got our stuff. They also have the advantage of having some, recent public films. Coco was a brilliant film. I'm watching the whole thing, like, man, this is African all the way through. And to your point, like and there's an African in them that they are able to sort of continue because they did not have the same disruption that we had, which is the problem of, I think there's a lot of power in the solidarity of the people of color conversation, the BIPOC conversation, but there's something very specific about what Black people have been through. We got to look at the commonalities and the differences in the trauma and the restoration and the healing, because there's a different process of turning an African into an African American, Negro, whatever it is, than it was for other immigrants, for other people that came in different ways. Everybody had their struggles. Again, it should be a competition, but there are uniquenesses that we need to pay attention to. I watched a Shang-Chi movie the other day. Y'all watched it just came on Disney Plus yesterday. So if you're on Disney Plus or somebody, you get the password. They had a moment where they had a big, beautiful altar from the Chinese perspective, right? So we got Latinx folk, we got Asian folk. They had a moment in here. I gotta see this. Where's my volume at? How do I get y'all to hear this?
You can read it.
I can read it.
Yeah.
I'll read it in case everybody can see it. The star of the show came in. The grandma said, that seat's for somebody. He said, oh, sorry. So he's getting all his favorite things this year for the Day of the Dead. Are you sure the white guns? It's going so fast. I can't read that fast. He can take anything. I put a bottle of whiskey on his grave, and it's gone the next morning. I know you kids think it's silly. We don't think it's silly, white pole. Another one came in. You just know the white pole wants you to go on living your life, moving on. Then the mother says, somebody else says, moving on is an American idea. But what's happened is, he came in and sat in the seat, and she said, no, that seat's for somebody that's not here no more. Probably it might have been a husband or a father. These again, very old African traditions where we save us a plate. We put a plate of food at the Thanksgiving table for those that are not there. We leave an actual seat so that we acknowledge that these aren't empty seats. These seats represent those of us that are not physically in the place, but are spiritually in the place. We want to acknowledge their presence. Very openly in Disney movies and Marvel movies, we see other people celebrating their stuff in ways that I don't see not even quite as clearly in Black Panther. They had an ancestor moment. I didn't see no altars in Black Panther. They didn't talk about ancestor sort of death process in the same way. This is something I think we need to recover. The only moment that I saw in Chicago was this event, so I got to acknowledge that. A sister named Desiree Sanders told me about an event that she was doing about remembering our ancestors. She was inspired by the same thing that I was watching the D-Day, watching this happen, and we're like, we got to do something for us. And it happened at a community garden. I think the name is on here, maybe, it might not be. She built a couple of different altars out here at this garden, where you see Mandela, Marcus Garvey on there, you see Malcolm X at the top, George Floyd at the bottom. We have a recent ancestor, Baba Tim, who just passed a little while ago. She had an altar for him. And I saw one Conrad Worrell on there too, who was the director of this center for decades, one of my greatest teachers. So she's made a moment to acknowledge that we have our own traditions and wanted to create space for that. And I just want to give a moment to recognize that. But then I asked some of the members to share their home altars. I wanted to make this not like an expert thing where we're saying I got somebody to come teach an altar, because it's a very personal process. The point of it is to do something that feels good to you, that fills your spirit. When you get inkling, I need to go buy a plant, or there's a rock that's speaking to me, or I need to put a picture of my grandma on the mantle. Those things they're not random musings. There's communications that are happening that are directing you to what you need to do to honor your personal ancestors. So there's no right way to do it. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that. Like, I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to do it. Or I'm not African enough. Or I haven't studied enough things. I want to get away from that for us. So as long as you're doing it and it honors your people, then it's right. And it's perfect and it's needed. It's wrong if you're hearing that urge and you ignoring that. That's when it's wrong. When you cut off your ear to them asking for something. Because what they're asking for something for is so that they can make exchanges for you in the afterlife. They're saying you in a bind. I need to make some deals for you, but I need you to make some offerings first. And it ain't got to be money. It could be whatever it is that speaks to you. It could be fruit. It could be water. It could be plants. It could be things that they used to love. It could be their favorite foods. There's no formula for this. It's just you have to create a space for yourself where you can make a seat for them in your house. When they feel forgotten, I used to grow up here, and it happened in Cocoa too. Part of the one of the arcs of the stories was that if you forget your ancestors, then they cease to exist. And I don't think it's quite that way. I think that they stop existing to us. I think that we lose our connection to them, but they don't go away. They exist somewhere, someplace, waiting for us to reconnect to them, to call their names, or to acknowledge even the names that we don't know. But there needs to be a space for that. We need to create rituals for that. And that's really all the altar is. Whether it's public or private, it's just a space to acknowledge that you didn't come from nowhere and that there's somebody still somewhere operating on your behalf that needs that connection, that link, for them to do what they're supposed to do, for you to be able to do what you're supposed to do. And it can look a bunch of different ways. Some of the most common elements I've seen were water. I like to keep fresh water on my altar. Like every day I pour a new glass of water. And that's really the only thing I do consistently. Sometimes I feel like I want to put some fresh flowers on there, and if I feel that, I do it. Sometimes I feel like I want to replace my coconut or put some other fruit, and if I feel that, I do it. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's no consistent thing, except for the water. For me, the water is the only thing that I do. Replace it, give me fresh water every day. Every once in a while, I feel like I want to buy my father's favorite dinner. I go to Yasser's, and I'll just put a plate there, I'll get 2 of them, I'll sit there and I'll eat it. And I'll just think about it. Right? Nothing fancy, nothing spooky, nothing devil, nothing. It's just me remembering my father and giving him the things that I remember him liking to connect me to him so that he could stay in my life in a way that's still very practical, very tangible. So I wanted to invite some of the other members who gave their pictures of their altars so you can see the range of them. So we saw some public ones, we saw some on TV, we now want to show some private altars. You call them memorials, you call them shrines, whatever you need to call it, to create a space in your organization, in your school, in your building. I've seen altars in schools, like in the school. They walk in and big altar, a friend right in the middle of the school. Like we're not even the African Center schools gonna do that. So I wanted to invite, who's this? This is Dr. Matthias. So just come share how you constructed your altar, what it means to you. I got 2 from you. So these 2 are the 2 altars that you have in your house. And then Dr. D has one that you sent a picture of. And then we're gonna wrap it up. Then we'll bring Dr. Mateen up to talk about her book. But I just wanted to introduce that concept, the concept of altars, why we use them, how they are connected to healing and grieving. But the most important part of it, there's a bunch of different ways that they can look. There's no right, there's no wrong, but you just want to make sure you have a space to honor your people. Dr. Thea, can you come up? We doing the mic just so that people on live stream can hear.
If you go back to, I'm
Can you
okay.
come up? Why are you doing that? I saw a hand in the back. Was that a question or a comment?
Comment.
Okay.
The question was asked about whether or not Black folks have a correlated celebration to Day of the Dead, and we kind of do. It's called Fête Getty.
Mm-hmm.
And ask
Yeah.
the Haitian community about that because they celebrate almost exactly the same as Dia de los Muertos, the same as Samhain, the same as the Feast of Public Ghosts. It's all the same thing from different cultures. It was the Catholic Church that brought them all, but most of them into the latter part of October, the early part of November. But we should get with the Haitian community
Mm-hmm.
and ask them, to explain to us the details of that gift. That's African people's Memorial Day. So
Yeah, we could absolutely do that. I agree.
So, kind of when you walk through my house, there's probably altars everywhere. And this one right here is my rock altar. And what it consists of, and maybe this rock is what I was feeling. So, rocks that do certain things, absorb energy, positivity, connection to spirit. The ones in the back are all rocks I got from the continent. Car shells from Tanzania, from Egypt. The pink ones from Ghana, so it's just rocks that make me, the shell, interesting story about even the shell, getting back here, because we're not supposed to be bringing those shells back here. But
True.
me and the student smuggled one back so I could put it on my altar. These beads here are pretty special. I had a reading in Cuba, and Yemenya was giving me a message, so I was instructed by the priest to go get the blue and white beads and take a trip across the water to see the first Yemenya set up in Cuba. So I went and did that, and that's the beads I got, and they got consecrated in all the rituals. And as I was leaving, he took this off his arm, which is Shango, Eshu, whoever at that time. He took it off his arm and put it on my arm and said, use this as protection. And so just kind of things that make me feel good, energies from the earth, just being connected. I'm very much a fire sign. So this keeps me connected. It's my room I call the Kick It room. So I have to pass by it every day. And so yeah, that's just one.
You click to the right, it'll show you the next one.
This one right here? This is in my office, and probably it's my biggest and most general altar. I actually got in the closet. And me and a friend of mine were playing around one day, and we were like, let's build an altar. So we actually built that. And then it just started collecting. I put it in the closet, and I just started collecting things. So these are things from my travels all over the world. Yeah, I recognize that big thing right there. Family, deities that actually have been kind of put in my way. So this one protects you from disease. And it's interesting how things come your way. It protects you from disease. The other warrior one, we want to have a conversation how I got there. Eshu is there. When I was in South Africa, everybody kept calling me Eshu. And actually Eshu just kind of showed up. When I was leaving Brazil, I'm like, okay, come home. Just books I've read over the years, family. One of my first pictures on my first, a student picked this out my first time I did study abroad to Brazil. So it's all like mean little things. It's pictures of my son playing basketball. It just keeps getting things on there, rocks from all over. There's a big rock back here from the last river that I took out the last river before we came over in Ghana. And then one, you probably can't see it now. I'll sit down up there. This is one big pink rock that Hatshepsut. I always say the pharaoh's name wrong, but she loved pink granite, and so and she actually is the one who designed a obelisk. She was known for obelisk, so she would take them out whole. So literally, there was this big pink rock laying across the dig site, picked it up. And an officer came with a gun and said, if everybody picked up a rock, every time they came here, we have no more rock, you should put it down. So I dropped it, and he walked on the other side, and I ran, and I picked it up and ran back to the bus. So everybody on the bus was like, you're gonna get us killed over a rock. But it's one of my most treasured rocks. But yeah, just things, nothing, plants. Did I add on? Godchildren. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Sophia. I said something earlier about there's no wrong way to do it. I just want to share that I was told once to be careful about putting live people on your ancestor altars. That would be the only thing that I was just share something that I heard once. Dr. D.
Where's that clicker? Okay, you all, so this is my altar. I keep it in a place where I see it every day. So it's in this, the way my house is set up, it's in a like little multi-purpose closet on the way to the bathroom. So they're right there. And because of my spacing, I had to buy something that's like a 3-tier thing. So these are just objects that represent my people, my immediate ancestors, very near and dear to me. I keep a candle lit. I keep my incense, and then this is just an empty vessel, if you will. I don't really know the purpose for it yet, but it's for something, maybe air. They love spirits, and then I got this from the continent, a sand art from Africa. I think I got it in Senegal. And my Florida water. I have in this little, I don't know what you call it. I got it from Ethiopia. I have some corn in there. So corn represents children. So I got the children there. And these are some objects from, this was something from my mother and something from my sister that they left behind. So I keep that in remembrance of them. And then my fresh water, I do my water every day, like you, Doc. And this is some frankincense from Ethiopia inside their container. I did my African ancestry DNA test and found out my results, and so that's in there along with my father. So I have my mother and my father's African lineage, which is Nigerian, Yoruba, Hausa, and Igbo. And then this is the incense burning. You can't really see it, but I have crystals of all kinds lined up behind the incense. And then this is the cross from the Church of Lalibela in Ethiopia. So all of it has a lot of rich meaning. You can go back and Google search it, but everything has a special meaning. The closest to me is my immediate ancestors, but I'll pass here every morning. I'll light an incense, the candle stays lit, freshen the water. I may say a prayer, give thanks, just remember them. Maybe ask for some guidance for that day or some help. So I think that's it.
And now I want to call Dr. Mateen up to share about another way of remembering our ancestors. She wrote a book in honor of her mother. And this is the last point about that. I think that, what we're talking about are symbolic, but actual, real life activations of space. So it's not decorations, it's not like, it's not even, I said symbolic, it's not even symbolic. It's an actual space where we can actually communicate with people. But the thing that they want the most, all of our ancestors, personal, family, and the community ancestors, is for us to do the work that they started. And so what Dr. Hanifas did, it represents that in a way where it's not a ceremonial thing. It's an actual telling the stories of her mother, putting in a book, sharing that testimony with other people, and helping advance her family lineage in memory of her mother. So I just wanted to give space to thank her for doing that work, and to talk more about, tell us more about that. Dr. Niles, while she's coming up, you have a question?
Oh, no, I think they got a question.
Oh, just a quick question. As far as replacing the water, do you have to be particular about the water? Because I was replacing spring water on my little small altar every
I'm
day.
not. I use tap water.
I use the water that I drink.
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I was like,
Yeah.
why would I give them water
from my
not to
filter.
so,
That's
okay.
right.
Mhm.
Alright,
I'm gonna
thank
start
you.
doing that. Thanks.
I just want
Thank
to
you.
say, when I talked to the priest in Cuba, same thing, you get worried about ways of doing things wrong. And he did his thing and said, you do it how you feel it.
Okay,
Mhm.
It's like, whatever you're feeling, how you put it, it's just that connection to ancestors is all that matters. Live, like I have one with live people on there, one with the, it's, just do your thing, feel it, and the love is all it takes.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hi, what's up, everybody? I'm Dr. Hanifa Mateen, and I'd actually been wanting to write a couple of books over the years, but with the advent of COVID, I thought it important to write this book about my mother, Mother's Love from Beyond. Because I wanted to also be a comfort to other people. There are some rough parts in that book. I have to warn you, some real life situations, of course. I wanted to show the different ways of grieving, the different spiritual growth that happens with the grieving process when we're allowed to. And that's the transformation is a very important part of African and ancient African spirituality that is inside us, and how come we've been able to make it this far. In the African village, whenever anyone dies, then the whole village comes together, the whole community, and supports the person. They cry, they scream, they fall out, all of that, which is included in some of our funerals. The difference is that after the funeral is over, it doesn't stop. Africans don't believe in leaving people alone. I actually spent 7 months in the village in Zimbabwe, and it was so different. You're talking about personal space? What's that? They think something's wrong with you if you want to be alone by yourself. And they told me they were going to make sure that I did not get homesick. And I didn't. I honestly didn't. And all the time I was there. The only way that I knew that I was homesick is I started craving stuff I wouldn't even eat, like pizza and potato chips and French fries. But I didn't get sad in my heart. Your pain is everyone's pain. If you were to go to an African healer, he would tell you to bring your family along. He would ask you, how do you get along with your family? How do you get along with the community? Before he would even ask you where your aches and pains are. Because a lot of our troubles is because we are not together in community. Because how we act affects everybody. He would consult with your elders in spirit, asking them for help for the best solution and the best herbs that you would need. Babies and children and pets naturally see those who have passed over. They see grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, siblings, cousins, whom they may not have even met before. African American mothers, at least when I was younger, used to ask their children every morning, what did they dream? Sometimes this was to play the numbers, but they also know that those dreams told about the future too. And it comforted them to be able to know what Big Mama might have had a message for them in that dream. Now we say they're smiling at the angels or they're just imaginary friends. They'll grow out of it. And when they go to first grade, they tell them, oh, it's all make-believe. And Hollywood movies do a good job of scaring us. Churches preach against it, and face it, you might get locked up or doped up, even these days, if you tell anybody about your kids or even yourself. This book is my mother's story, but it's also my story. How losing my mother at a young age due to domestic violence and being put in a foster home affected me for the most of my life. Being moved across the country away from all of my extended family, in the neighborhood that loved me, because back in those days you could leave your doors unlocked. Everybody looked out for each other. All the adults were mothers and fathers, and we had to bathe them, and everybody knows this story about, yeah, you get whipped by the neighbor, and by the time you got home, that strap is waiting for you. That's when we cared, and we weren't afraid to care, before they put drugs in our neighborhoods and ruin our families. At age 26, I had a near-death experience. Went to heaven, met with God, who filled me with incredible love, peace, and total acceptance, no matter what I had done in my life. But I got sent back to earth, as you can see. When I woke up in the hospital, what kept playing over and over in my head was, what have I done with my life? What have I done with my life? What have I done with my life? And I couldn't figure out what was that? What did it mean? Because it's not that I did a lot of sinful things. With time, I realized it was because I wasn't living up to my full potential. Wasn't using my talents. And my life changed, and it changed in positive and negative ways. For one, I came back psychic, knowing about things before they happened. The other thing is, with a near-death experience, you get shown your life, a life review, of which you actually judge yourself. And so if you're not finished with learning your lessons and experiences here on earth, then you have to come back and do them. And with that, there's trials, tribulations, having to go back and review childhood stuff and heal that. So my book also has different forms of therapy that I have been through on that journey. Some of them connected to African, indigenous ways of healing that, yeah, white folks have stole a little piece here and a little piece there and charge you buku money for it. Previously, before my near-death experience, my mother had gone to her hometown to visit family for Thanksgiving. And then nobody saw her after that. Except when my mother's spirit came to the rescue, when my sister was in a domestic violence situation. I lived upstairs from her. and her husband, you could hear the rage and the anger in his voice and things being thrown around. I got up, I went and sat on the couch. And I felt the cushion on the couch go down next to me as if someone was sitting there. But I couldn't see them. Invisible to me. My mother gave later went for help. But she told me afterwards that maybe I should go see a psychiatrist. Anyway, that was a good thing, but it was too spooky for me. Thereafter, I pulled the covers over my head at night and told my mother's spirit to go away, and she did. But she found other ways to let me know that she was around. She would send me birds when I was outside. Very special red-winged blackbird, the red cardinals, a red fox. I would hear them. The songs that she used to sing to us when we were children. I smelled her Avon perfume. Mostly when I was feeling down. Every year I felt depressed on her birthday in April. In October, that was hard too because she used to take us to the parks and let us play, you know, swishing and crunching the leaves. And I would be depressed on Thanksgiving, of course, because that used to be my favorite holiday. As I got older, my grief lessened. But still, on her birthday, that would be hard. I would actually feel like out of it, off, disorientated. And then at bedtime, I would remember, oh, it's Mama's birthday. 9 years ago, I went to a spiritualist church, and a medium brought my mother's message through for me. And these messages showed that my mother still saw what was happening in my life, everyday things. Some things were minor, some things were really important. And once she found out she could communicate through the medium, then she made up for those 34 years that she hadn't been around. And whatever I needed came, even money. Checks would just show up in my mailbox. She had me return to counseling, to seeing a therapist, to different types of healing. She helped me make it through college. And in my book, you'll see where she was like, no, no, no. You're not gonna be like me and your grandmothers. You're gonna speak up. And I stood up to racism in my predominantly white graduate school. It almost cost me my degree, but it's still worth it. But I still had to make peace with what religion had taught me. Don't go to soothsayers. There's no God but Allah. Believe in only one God. You're going to hell. Ancestor worship is pagan, evil, juju of the devil. By the end of the book, I tell the story of how domestic violence took away my faith in God initially, and then later made my faith even stronger than before. People said my mother was very pious. I wanted to see the beauty in Islam that she saw, the beauty in Christianity of my grandmothers and my aunties. But why would my mother begin coming to me in spirit if it was wrong? And with that, Dr. Wash.
Thank you so very much, Doc. You have copies of the book here. They're $10, which is, I think, low for that, but we'll take that for now. And if you have questions, you want to get it signed, she'll be here. And next and last, we want to invite Dr. Karen Witherspoon to come speak. I'd asked her to do a couple of things. She is the owner of a really powerful collective of Black clinicians, and they do a bunch of different kind of clinical work. We do as help a bunch of clinical kind of work. And so I wanted to hear what she's seeing from that perspective in terms of the grief, in terms of the loss, how she is helping clients experience and cope and deal. And I specifically asked her to help share with us one of the things. We had a moment, we were on the planning Zoom, when I asked her if she had an altar in the house. She's like, no, I have an altar in the house. She immediately turned over right to that image of her mother that she says, I turn and have her watch over me when I need to be inspired. I'm like, no, that's it. That's exactly what we're talking about. So I wanted her to speak to that, those sort of unspoken African things that we might not consider sacred or ritualistic, and how she merges those with still remaining unapologetically Christian, which I think speaks to most Black people's experiences, but have to figure out how to merge the juju, the devil worship kind of stuff. And I think you have really good insight on how to help us with that conversation too. So, Dr. Karen Witherspoon, and then we'll open the floor. We'll just stay and talk and connect and share and build and support each other best we can. So, Dr. Karen Witherspoon, and then we'll open the floor for everyone to speak.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I brought my altar with me today, and I apologize. I was also late. It's probably very indicative of many things that I do, so I wasn't here on time to get that here or send pictures ahead of time. But glad to be here. It's interesting. I've probably been involved in the Association of Black Psychologists since I was, in grad school, and so we're talking about 25 plus years. And so originally when I got involved, I actually thought the organization wasn't for me. And by that I meant, like, here are all these people first that I've read about, Naeem Akbar and just names, Linda James Myers, the people that, I reverence and just read about. But I thought, well, I'm not really African like that. Like, I'm Black and I'm pro-Black, but in terms of thinking about, wearing African attire and understanding indigenous African practices, I still had a lot to learn. And so trying to figure out how do I fit into this world where I very much wanted to be a part of, but also being authentic to people that I personally felt had touched my life. And so I come from a long line of sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost spirit kind of aunts and my grandmother and just my family members. And so as I started to embrace more of my African culture, it was interesting in terms of having some of those conversations. And one of the things that's been interesting, particularly owning a group practice right now during the pandemic, I should say pandemics, so there's a racial pandemic happening, there's a global health pandemic happening, there are all sorts of civil unrest. And so one of the things that I'm finding is that I tend to attract Black people, and I'm real happy about that. So that, we have a mission of the organization that's designed to, in particularly, target communities that have been underserved in some kind of way, who may not naturally seek out a therapist, a counselor, So we would tend to go to where? The church, right? Go to our pastors, go to our ministers. I really believe that there's a place for many as you talk about trying to heal, and particularly as you talk about healing from loss. And so it's been interesting in terms of the demand for counselors and the demand for Black counselors are actually up. So if you're looking at anything in the media or, celebrities now are, talking about getting counseling and that kind of stuff. And so there's still stigma. There's still stigma associated with, mental health in general. But there certainly is an increase for Black people. And so, Black counselors. And so one of the things that I really wanted to share today is that the biggest struggle that I'm seeing amongst people who are calling for services is this idea that I'm not going to be able to honor my ancestors in the way that I was taught. So the whole funeral, the whole homegoing celebration, you can have days and days and days of celebration and wakes and memorials and repasts. And so those time-honored traditional rituals that many people were not able to do for a while and still can't do to the same extent that we used to do in terms of gathering, that seemed to be the main regret or guilt or somehow sort of feeling lost without being able to do that. And so really the focus has been on the reason why today's discussion is so important is because it reminds us that the goal is to honor and remember and celebrate our ancestors. And so the way in which you do that can be many. And so here's an example of something that we can do by tying it back, to our culture originally. And also dispelling some of the myths about building an altar is not worshiping things or, so looking at some of the ideas that these things are sort of rooted in cultural practices and look how they've manifested here in Black people in America. The last point that I will make in terms of thinking about loss, and I'm really talking about loss in general, not just loss due to death, is the idea that part of what made grief a little bit more complicated, if you will, during this time is because people were experiencing many losses. So loss of social relationships and, loss of contact with people, loss of routine, like every Friday I went to Mariano's, after I left the office, and just all sorts of things. And so identifying with that idea of loss. And I think people also connect loss to the idea of grief. And so, when you think about some of these Eurocentric models of grieving and things that people rely on, probably one of the most popular ones that people think about is that, who is it, Kubler-Ross? I think it was, was it a Swiss doctor? She was, I think, or somewhere. But, it talks about those 5 stages, starting with denial and ending in acceptance. And so people still that's still a very popular theory and people focus on it. There's something missing from that theory, right? And so probably one of the things that's been most salient to me in terms of missing is this idea that anxiety is tied to grief. So that when you learn that someone got COVID, for example, what's the worry? The fear, right? That it's going to, they're going to succumb to that particular disease. And so anxiety or fear is not even a stage when you talk about that. Most people think about being depressed or being angry or, trying to being mad at God or trying to negotiate. And so it's an example of, one, how when people say, oh, these theories don't apply to us, that's an example of something that's very real and central to most people who are grieving. Fear that you recognize your own mortality, fear that you haven't done everything that you were supposed to do before you leave here, fear that guilt that you didn't do for Big Mama or for Auntie, the things that you didn't make her proud. And so there's that major connection. And so a lot of the work that we're doing with individuals around complicated grief and loss at this time has to do with them having them recognize the fears and the messages that they have either been socialized to learn about loss and to cope with loss. And so that's been very transformative for many people in terms of their healing.
Wait, what about the Christian part? How do you make that make sense of that?
So for the Christian part, it makes sense because, well, I speak with authority. And so when I tell you that building an altar is not worshiping, it's not anti-sacrilegious. So I guess opening up and having the discussion about what the fears are, what this will mean if I develop other rituals to replace the ones that traditionally I've done. And so that's the kind of the Christian discussion in terms of, so when you think about sort of your connection to a higher power and recognizing that, you know, for you, you call it God, and the way through which you know, get connected to eternity is Jesus, so that helping people to understand that people use different languages to describe that experience of what you're having. So in one way, it's sort of, I think you talked about, we can discuss commonalities, but you also need to discuss differences. So as a black person who has been raised Christian, in terms of being AME, African Methodist Episcopal, is sort of how I was raised. But like I said, on one side of the family, I think then we moved to CME, Christian Methodist Episcopal. But then my father's side of the family was Kojic, you know, Church of God in Christ. And so the influences of even thinking about the differences between them and the things that we had to do, it's about not being afraid to have the discussion and then asking people to look through their cultural lens to be able to identify. Now, what is it that you're calling Christian? Because sometimes it's not rooted in anything that's, you know, God-like, and then understanding how this may be related to an African cultural tradition. So psychoeducation, if you will, for those of you students in here in terms of trying to think about terms that you're using, we do a lot of psychoeducation about what it means to be black and understanding that we're not a monolithic group, that it can be so diverse. And so that kind of ties me back to my point of, here I was thinking that ABSI wasn't for me because I wasn't black enough. You know what I mean? That was the fear that I had. Learning then, though, that I could still get into mainstream culture than most of the members, and that was still okay, and that I was still accepted because of that.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but I was just going to say, when it comes to Christianity, do you think that sometimes the way it's interpreted could have an effect? Maybe, you know, some people read the Bible linear, and some people read it more like circular, more like a metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of just the point of thinking about things in a linear fashion is what westernized world way of thinking, and things can, you know, be both.
Right.
Yeah, not or and.
When you mentioned the Christianity part, I was raised in a Bible Belt, born and raised, and so when Dr. Cartman said something about altar, I think you mentioned that. I remember very vividly in church, they would say, come to the altar, and, you know, use oil on you. And so it's interesting how that part of black life that I grew up with was not demonized, but when we have an altar in our homes, that's considered bad, when those same terms were used in the black church, you know, as you grew up, and it's not really, there's no connection, so.
Yeah, that certainly helps to demystify it when you can provide an example of, well, look, we talk about altars in this way, and it's sacred.
Right.
How come this has to be different?
Yeah, so.
Well, I've been a Baptist for 72 years, and we have altars at my church of members who have passed, where certain times of the year they light candles for those members. So I'm not, and see, as black people, we have to understand that religion is the second biggest separator of us. And I was taught this way, because you know the kind of stuff I do. And you know what I was taught by my mother? This is my question to you. Do you believe that there is one true God?
Right.
And if you believe, that person says, yes, they believe that there's one true God. Because if you were living in China, you would be saying God in Chinese. You wouldn't be saying God like we say it. So it don't matter whether you say Allah, Jehovah, God, Yahweh. It's only one true God. We just have different, we eat spaghetti, but we all eat it a different way. So we have to start being realistic at some of the things that we claim.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, I think that it's so easy to mistake the ritual for the religion. Because Gandhi's statement is that he wished there were more Christians. He said, I like Christ. What I don't understand, I was saying that one of the challenges is not to be mesmerized by the rituals of religion. They are mesmerizing, all services are. But there's an essence to it, all of them, that is the challenge. It's like the difference between acting like a Christian and going to church. It's a different thing entirely, but the essence is the being like Christ, not the worship and the ceremony. So the challenge is always to realize that it's all about being the best we can be. Having compassion for each other, that's the essence. Yeah. The rituals are, as I said, very mesmerizing, but one must try not to get lost in them or to have faith in them rather than in the works that one does.
Let's pivot a little bit. So there's some really powerful people in the room. I want to make sure we have enough time to just talk a little bit. We almost in a circle enough. If this side used and that side used, we can make a circle, and then we just gonna open the floor. I'm gonna turn the mic off. We can even stop the well, I think the people can't hear. Let's just talk a little bit. I want to have a moment to process. I want people to be able to meet each other. So if you have a comment or a question or some work that you're doing, you want to invite other people to participate in. We're going to spend this last 20, 25 minutes just in an open discussion about all of this stuff. Thank y'all for joining us on Facebook, Instagram Live. We're going to end the broadcast right now. And see y'all next time.